The first time someone mentioned the door, it was said like a joke, the way people joke about old buildings settling or the air vents making voices, something to laugh off while glancing nervously down the hallway. Nobody remembered locking the door, but it was always locked, always sealed shut when morning came, the knob cold and stubborn, the frame holding firm like it had never known another position, and at first everyone assumed it was just habit, that someone must have turned the key without thinking, the way lights get switched off automatically when leaving a room. The house had belonged to a retired schoolteacher named Mrs. Calder before it was divided into shared rentals, and her presence still clung to the place in small, inconvenient ways, handwritten labels inside cupboards, a faint smell of lavender that no cleaning product ever seemed to erase, a thin draft that slid across the floor at night even when the windows were closed. The door in question was at the end of the upstairs corridor, a narrow, plain wooden thing with chipped white paint and a brass knob that never quite warmed to the touch. It didn't lead anywhere useful, not to a bedroom or a bathroom or storage, just to a shallow space behind the old chimney where nothing had been kept for years. That was what the landlord said, anyway. A dead space. A leftover. Something better ignored. Except it refused to be ignored, because every morning, without fail, it was locked. And no one remembered doing it. At first it was Mark who noticed. He worked late shifts at the hospital and slept during the day, and he started to mention, half awake over breakfast, that he was sure he'd left the door open the night before. He said it casually, like it didn't matter, like he was just thinking out loud, but he said it again the next week, and then again, and the pattern began to settle in. Priya, who rented the smallest room across from the bathroom, said she'd never even touched the door. Luis claimed he'd tried the handle once when he first moved in and found it locked, and had never bothered with it again. Jenna laughed it off and suggested that maybe someone was sleepwalking. They all looked at Mark when she said that, and he raised his hands in surrender, swearing he'd never done anything stranger than talk in his sleep. The landlord, when asked, frowned and said the key had been lost years ago, that the lock was old, unreliable, probably sticking shut because of the frame. Wood swelling, he suggested. Weather changes. Perfectly normal. But the explanation never quite sat right, because if the lock was unreliable, it should sometimes fail the other way. It should sometimes open. It never did. The sound started small. A faint click from the end of the hall, so light it could have been pipes, or the house shifting, or imagination. A whisper of movement when the rest of the house was still, like someone adjusting their weight behind the door. No one wanted to admit they'd heard anything, so they didn't, not at first. People learn quickly how to stay silent about things that don't fit neatly into explanation, because once you speak them aloud they become real, and real things demand attention. But attention, once given, can be dangerous. The first person to admit it was Priya, and she did it accidentally, mentioning over dinner that the house made strange little noises near her room at night. Jenna teased her, asked if she'd been binge-watching horror videos again. Priya smiled, but she didn't laugh. She said it sounded less like creaking and more like breathing. The room went quiet for a second too long. Mark changed the subject. Nobody wanted to follow that thought to its end. What made it worse was the memory problem. Not big gaps, not anything dramatic, just small, unsettling moments where certainty slipped through their fingers. Luis was sure he'd left his phone charging on the kitchen counter overnight, only to find it in the hallway by the locked door. Jenna once woke with mud on the hem of her pajama pants and no idea how it got there, though she insisted she'd gone straight to bed after her shower. Mark found the lights downstairs on more than once, even when everyone claimed to have been asleep. Each incident on its own could be explained, rationalized, forgotten. Together they formed a pattern that nobody wanted to look at directly. And always, every morning, the door was locked. They tried practical solutions. They bought a cheap camera and set it up in the hallway, angled toward the door. The first night it recorded nothing but static between 2:13 a.m. and 4:47 a.m., a long blank stretch where the footage corrupted itself into blocks of gray and digital snow. The file ended there. No unlocking. No opening. Just a handle moving, deliberate and patient. When they watched it together in the kitchen, no one spoke. The landlord, when shown the clip, laughed nervously and suggested someone had edited it as a prank. He refused to watch it twice. The dreams began around the same time. Shared dreams, or at least eerily similar ones. A narrow corridor that seemed longer than the house could possibly hold. Walls that leaned inward slightly, as if listening. The door at the end, always present, always locked. In the dreams, they would stand before it, knowing with absolute certainty that they must not open it, that something on the other side depended on their ignorance. Sometimes they dreamed of keys in their hands, cold and heavy. Sometimes they dreamed of scratching sounds from behind the wood. Mark described waking with the impression that someone had been standing beside his bed, close enough that he could feel their attention, even if he couldn't see them. Priya said she kept dreaming of forgetting something important, something she'd promised not to do. Luis stopped talking about his dreams altogether, but dark circles settled under his eyes and stayed there. They searched the house in daylight, every corner, every crawl space, every cupboard. The space behind the locked door, according to the landlord's old floor plans, should have been barely big enough for cleaning supplies. A hollow. A leftover gap in the architecture. But when Mark pressed his ear to the wood, he swore he could hear depth on the other side, not the dead, close silence of a shallow wall, but something larger, something that seemed to recede. He knocked once, experimentally. The sound that came back was wrong. Too delayed. As if the knock had traveled farther than it should have before returning. It was Jenna who finally did what they had all been circling around for weeks. She found a thin metal pick in her brother's old toolbox and spent an afternoon sitting on the floor by the door, tongue caught between her teeth, coaxing the lock open with stubborn patience. No one stopped her. No one told her not to. They just watched, from the kitchen doorway, pretending they could leave at any time. The click, when it came, was soft but unmistakable. The handle turned easily in her hand. For a moment, nobody moved. The house felt like it was holding its breath. The space behind the door was not shallow. It was not empty. It was not anything that made sense. The air inside was colder than the rest of the house, stale and faintly metallic. The beam of Mark's phone flashlight revealed a narrow passage sloping slightly downward, the walls unfinished, rough stone and old timber that looked far older than the rest of the building. The floor was packed dirt, scuffed with footprints that didn't match any of their shoes. They stood there in silence, each of them waiting for someone else to say this is a bad idea, to close the door again, to pretend none of this had happened. Instead, one by one, they stepped inside. The passage stretched further than it should have, bending gently out of sight. No one could later agree on how long they walked, only that it felt like too long, like the house had unfolded inward around them. At the end of the passage was another door. This one had no handle on their side. They turned back before they touched it. Or at least, they thought they did. Memory, by then, had become unreliable. What they knew for certain was this: when they woke the next morning, scattered in their beds as if nothing had happened, the door at the end of the hallway was locked again. The pick Jenna had used was gone. The camera files from that night were not corrupted. They were missing entirely, as if they had never existed. They moved out, one by one, over the following months. Mark found a place closer to work. Priya moved in with her cousin. Luis claimed he'd gotten a better offer elsewhere. Jenna stayed the longest, out of stubbornness or denial, but even she eventually packed her things without ceremony and left her key on the kitchen counter. New tenants came. The landlord repainted the walls. He replaced the carpet. He told everyone the same thing about the door: it led nowhere, it was best ignored, the lock was unreliable, the key long lost. And still, from time to time, someone would mention it in passing, the odd little detail that didn't quite fit, the way the door was always locked in the morning. Nobody remembered locking it. But it was always locked. Always sealed. Always as if something on the other side depended on it remaining closed, and as if, every night, someone made sure it stayed that way. If this story pulled you in, made you glance toward the quiet corners of your own room or think twice about the doors you never open, don't let it end here. Follow for more real-feeling horror, more unsettling mysteries, and more stories that stay with you long after the screen goes dark.